Good morning, everyone. It is 8 a.m. sharp, so we're going to get started with our Institute for County Government Chairpersons Academy. Please welcome the Institute for County Government's Executive Director, Eric Poole. Good morning, Eric.
Good morning. Feel like I'm on TV. Well, I am on TV. Good morning, everyone, and hope everyone's doing well. I know we are starting really early, and we'll have folks kind of meandering in over the next couple of minutes, but it's nice to be together again after, seems like I think almost a year since the association had an in-person conference, notwithstanding our legislative day in Tallahassee in the spring. Let me begin by introducing myself. As Craig indicated, I'm Eric Poole with FACTS Institute for County Government. That's the training and education arm of the association. We run the Certified County Commissioner program, and then we also have a leadership forum that we'll talk a little bit more about at the 10 o'clock new commissioner orientation. So if you're a new commissioner, I encourage you to attend that. If you're an existing or a veteran commissioner, it might be a nice refresher to come in and attend that. I will say that the session that we have this morning and at 10 o'clock, these are the what we call pre-conference sessions. The official session will kick off at lunch. But again, I encourage everyone to come in and participate in these sessions. I can assure you they're pretty informative and very entertaining. Just a couple of housekeeping issues. Do we have any of our executive committee in the room? I think I saw Commissioner Truex. It's our second vice president, Bill Truex from Charlotte County. Anybody else? I saw Commissioner Thomas in the back, our president-elect. Good morning. All right, let me just on a couple of things on before we begin the session. And this is going to be a kind of an unusual conference because it is, as you know, you had an option of doing something that was either virtual, so you could stay at home or in your office or in person. And so this is a hybrid format for us. And so we would really appreciate your patience as we accommodate both the in-person and virtual participants. If you look in the back of the room, we have a lot of equipment. This is like doing Zoom on steroids. So for attendees in the room, our presenters and virtual participants will not be able to see or hear you if you do not come up to the microphone in the audience. So if you have any questions, please make sure you come to the microphone, and you're going to kind of hear this repeated throughout the conference. For our virtual participants back in their counties, we have staff monitoring the Zoom chat. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat, and staff will facilitate and make sure your questions are answered. And if you're participating virtually and need help, please call FACT staff, either Latoya at 850-228-8254 or Milan at 850-590-6306. All the meeting materials for this conference are available for download at factpolicy.com or by scanning the QR code on the back of your name badge. All right, for this morning's program, as I mentioned, the ICG is the training arm of the association, and our classes are designed to help commissioners make more informed decisions as elected officials. In keeping with that goal and with the help and support of Leon County, the ICG Board of Directors created the Chairperson's Academy to provide training on the duties, powers, and responsibility of the chair's leadership positions. This class explores how its chairman can avoid highly predictable problems and make slight changes in behavior to run a county commission meeting more effectively. And as I mentioned, while the class is designed for board chairs, all commissioners can benefit from this training. Normally this class is about 3 hours, and we asked our presenters who are actually back in Leon County to compress this down to about 90 minutes. So it's a very good presentation, but you're going to see some of the information maybe a little bit compressed and accelerated. And let me just introduce today's presenters. It is Vince Long. He is the Leon County Administrator in my hometown of Tallahassee. He's been with the county for over 20 years. I've known Mr. Long for at least 18 years and has a really broad depth of county management, county administration, and has a passion for this type of work and is a very good teacher. Also with him is his new county attorney, Chastity Osteen, and she has really been baptized with COVID and has really led the county in helping them work through all of the difficult obstacles with the pandemic. And she comes by way of experience with the state of Florida and the Department of Management Services. So with that, Vince, I hope you can hear me. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. And also, let me just mention, after Vince's section, we'll have a few minutes for some questions. 4 minutes if you have any. We have microphones to my left and to my right, and you can just ask those questions. People that are attending virtually, you can ask those questions in the chat. So Vince, sorry for the delay, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Eric, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. I wish I was with you in Jacksonville. I know we all look forward to being in our large groups again. And for us, I mean, that's really where we have a lot of fun doing these trainings, is to be able to get to see everyone and meet everybody in person there. As Eric said, I've done lots of trainings with FAC over a number of years, but this is the first virtual session that we've done. So we're going to give it a shot. I hope everyone in there has your coffee. It looks like you do. And with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. So to begin with, commissioners, who here has heard the old unfortunate metaphor about the policy-making process being like making sausage? Anyone? Well, of course, we all have. Well, I'm here to tell you that it's an unfortunate and inaccurate and unfair comparison, and it's about time someone finally point this out, especially when they say it about us at the county commission level, right? But since people like to say this, let's compare. You see, in fact, sausage making is a highly routine process. It's private, it's unemotional, it's a safe process that no one really cares about, because at the end of it, we all get to eat sausage, right? On the other hand, the county commission meeting, or a county commission meeting, is a highly public and ever-shifting and inherently emotional and conflict-ridden process, which everyone cares about, because at the end of it, let's face it, we all get to pay taxes. So you see, there's really no comparison at all. I think that should finally put this analogy to rest. Well, maybe not. But all joking aside, as much as we may not like this metaphor, the process of making legislation has probably earned its description as something that is necessary, but you don't want to see how it's made. The only thing that's perhaps worse is being the one who has to make it, right? So, but it doesn't have to be that way. And so, yes, chairing a county commission meeting can be challenging. And doing it well and making this process look good, well, takes some real know-how. That's why each year we elect a new unsuspecting commissioner to throw out in front of this process with perhaps no previous experience or any formal training at all, to serve as our chairman, right? Well, at least that part all changes today. This is not your usual presentation about chairing a usual meeting, because let's face it, county commission meetings are a lot of things, but they're not usual. If you were to Google how to chair an effective meeting, any other meeting, you'd find the same 5 or so tips over and over again. Tips like be prepared, follow the agenda, et cetera, et cetera. That's all very good advice, but it's more about efficiency than effectiveness. And that kind of advice, while helpful, really doesn't contemplate all that is unique and, frankly, all that can go wrong potentially in a county commission meeting. I think Uncle Milty here probably said it best about efficient meetings when he said that it was a group of people coming together to keep minutes and lose hours. Based on that quote, come to think of it, Uncle Milty must have been to a few county commission meetings. Who knew? But today, commissioners, we're going to focus on effectively chairing a county commission meeting, which is its own animal. This required a very specific presentation for this purpose. It's taken me over 25 years and approximately 12,000 hours of participating in county commission meetings. That figure could be accurate, or maybe it just felt like 12,000 hours. I don't know which. But here's what I found, and here's what I've learned over that period of time. And that is that county commission meetings can be a rich, rewarding experience, or they can be the worst thing that you've ever had to endure in your life. And consider this, at both kinds of meetings, the very best commission meetings and the very worst, you can have the same meeting agenda, the same issues, the same format, the same rules, the same everything, and those meetings can go drastically differently, can't they? And further, you can have an easy meeting. We've all seen the easy agendas, right? The curse of the easy agenda. You can have an easy meeting filled with non-controversial issues go terribly bad. On the other hand, you can have a potentially terrible meeting loaded with controversial issues go just fine. Isn't that true? I'd further submit to you that sometimes the only difference between the best meetings and the worst meetings is the chairman. And before you think, well, there are just people who are good chairmen, and I'll use the term chairman universally, chairman, chairwoman, and those who are not, in those 25 years and about 12,000 hours of commission meetings, I can tell you only one thing for sure, and that is there are very few naturally great chairmen. The effective chairmen generally do not share, interestingly enough, similar educational backgrounds. They don't come from common professions or comparable life experiences, or even share similar personality traits. In fact, people from all backgrounds of life have proven to be capable of being great chairmen, and vice versa. So what do the good ones do that others do not? That's what we're going to focus on today. But first, sometimes the best example is a bad example, right? We're going to present a couple of bad examples here right off the bat of commission chairman types. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these, and I need to make a disclaimer. As a currently employed county administrator, I've never personally seen any of these chairman types, but they're said to exist. So the first one is the dominant chairman. As you see here, the dominant chairman uses their time as chairman to impose their will on the group. They see it as a license to dominate, to elevate their political profile, and to push their individual agenda. Anyone ever have a chairman like this? Now just raise your hand at your table if, no, I'm just kidding. You don't have to do that. Next up, we have the lazy chairman. Okay, the lazy chairman sits back, not taking responsibility for the meeting, so they can spread the responsibility for their indecisiveness among the whole group. They seize on every opportunity and every expression of disagreement or doubt as a justification for avoiding decision or action. Now, here's a tip. The lazy chairman shouldn't have taken the job. There's nothing that anywhere in statute or in any charter that I know of, or probably not in any policy, that says that you have to serve as chair. Now, I've seen chairmen that may fall into this category, or let me say that more clearly, I've heard of chairmen that might fall into this category that call a meeting to order and literally pull back from the table and figuratively hit the autopilot button. That's when bad things happen. You have the Scoutmaster chairman. This is my personal favorite. The Scoutmaster chairman sees the collective activity of the group as satisfaction enough, with no need for achievement. Their chairmanship is more like the endless stoking of a campfire that's not cooking anything. So the chairman, that chairman, the Scoutmaster chairman, is giving it a go. They just need a little training. Now that we've have all of these purely hypothetical examples out of the way, we're going to spend the rest of our time together focused on behaviors of another type of chairman called the effective chairman. So what about the definition of the effective chairman? Well, quite simply, Commissioners, the effective chairman is collegial and in control, avoids unnecessary conflict, and facilitates productive and fair deliberations, which result in clear policy direction. That's worth another read. Again, the effective chairman is collegial and in control, avoids unnecessary conflict, facilitates fair and productive deliberations, which result in clear policy direction. This definition, you'll be happy to know, doesn't come from the literature. It's just the way that most people would describe the effective chairman in my county and probably yours. This is the way that fellow commissioners would probably describe an effective chairman. You'd know it when you see it, right? But if it were that simple, all commission meetings would be run this way, wouldn't they? So the question is, what are the key behaviors of the effective county commission chairman in running a successful meeting this way? So let's get right to it. Commissioners, Eric said in the opening, we're going to talk about key behaviors of the effective chairman, and everything I talk about today will come back to this. The effective county commission chairman identifies potential problems before they happen. After they happen, well, there's not much you can do. And they use a few slight changes in behavior which have a big impact on the effectiveness of the meeting. And here's the thing. The great majority of potential problems we face in county commission meetings are entirely predictable. And most of the things that we'll talk about today that effective chairmen do, people will not even notice that you're doing them. They'll just say, man, that chairman or chairwoman runs a great meeting. So I've broken this presentation down into 3 critical times when a chairman can exercise this behavior. At the beginning of the meeting, or what we call setting the mood, while running the meeting, and lastly, when we talk about keeping a meeting on track, what we call the dreaded disruptions, interruptions, and eruptions, the fitting acronym of which is DIE, because, well, that's what we'll all want to do when this happens. So we will discuss very specific examples of exercising this behavior that you can use at these critical times during your meetings. So when FAC asked me to put together this training last year, the very first thing I thought about was something a longtime chairman told me many years ago, and I never forgot it. I was in a training much like this, except we were in person, and it wasn't a chairman training. I think I was doing a training on budget or some other fascinating aspect of our jobs. And I saw this longtime commissioner walk in, a friend of mine, and I recognized him, and I asked him, well, how you doing, Commissioner? And he said, and I told him, I said, I heard you were nominated to be chair again. And that was a little inside joke in his county because they were supposed to rotate chairman, or that was the idea, but they always seemed to nominate him as chair. And I remember he said something folksy to me like, well, Vince, nobody else wanted to do it. And, you know, normally we let things like that go, but I was curious. So I asked him, now, really, Commissioner, what do you think? Why do you think it is that they always seem to nominate you as chairman? What is it about the way you run a meeting? And he looked at me and he said, and I'll never forget it, he said, Vince, I guess it's the same reason I've been married for 40 years and have 6 children. I guess I just really know how to set the mood. Well, we both laughed, but I'll tell you, and what he said, he followed and he said, good mood, good meeting. And I thought about that for many years since, and I've seen the wisdom of that play out over and over again by effective chairmen. So number one, set the mood. When we talk about setting the mood for a county commission meeting, you're setting the mood for 2 groups of people, right? Your commission and the public. So let's talk about the commission first. To play off that setting the mood innuendo, Jack Welch, the famous CEO of GE, once said, when speaking of the effectiveness of GE's board meeting, we turned the meetings of our board into intellectual orgies. Now, how many commissioners can say that about your county commission meetings? Just go ahead and raise your hands. No, you don't have to raise your hands on this one. You see, you thought that sausage making was the worst imagery that I could conjure up this morning. Absolutely not. But the fact of the matter here is that setting the mood for a good meeting is what the best chairmen do best. And it's not just a feel-good thing, commissioners. It may be the easiest and most important thing you can do as chairman. You see, by setting the mood for an effective meeting, you establish a tone. You set an energy level in the room. You maybe even subtly assuage concerns of commissioners who may be walking into the room ready for battle on that particular day or night. And think about this. If the chairman misses the opportunity to set the mood at the beginning of the meeting, the mood still gets set, but it'll probably get set by the issues on the agenda or the events or personalities in the moment in your commission chambers. Now think about that for a moment. Rather than that happening, the effective chairman and only the chairman really has the opportunity to set the thermostat at the beginning of the meeting. We talk a lot about we use this parlance of taking the temperature of the board and that sort of thing. I would suggest to you that the chairman's role is not to take the temperature of the board, but to be the thermostat. Now, most chairmen want to know, okay, Vince, what do I do when things go wrong at a meeting? Tell me about that first. Well, that's kind of like setting the thermostat when there's a fire in the living room, right? Remember, as an effective chairman, you set the thermostat to avoid the heat. Again, avoiding problems before they happen, predictable problems. And so what does that look like? Or in this case, what does that sound like if the chairman misses the opportunity to set the mood at a commission meeting? Well, allow me to demonstrate. Commissioners, I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is your meeting of December 2nd, Tuesday, 2020. This meeting is scheduled to begin at 5 p.m. We have 47 items on the agenda tonight. We also have a public hearing to begin at 6 p.m. We have a long meeting tonight, Commissioners, so please keep that in mind. Mr. Administrator, I'd like to turn it over to you for agenda item number 1. Now, did that sound familiar to anyone? Of course it did, but what's wrong with that? Well, think about it this way. All of your commissioners are sitting in a room, and in front of them is a piece of paper or a tablet that says, this is the meeting of Tuesday, December 2nd, 2020. This meeting is scheduled to begin at 5 p.m. We have 47 agendas on the, you get the idea. The chair presumably is trying to get everyone on the same page and convey that there's some really important things that we need to do tonight. But when done this way, by repeating what the people in the room already know, it's actually a signal for them to check out. Now, a lot of what I talk about today, there's some behavioral science behind, or BS for short. But it is behavioral science, and there's a lot happening in the commission chambers. And this is very important. Our brains have evolved over thousands of years to decipher in mere seconds what's important and what's not, commissioners. You know that. And think about when your teachers used to begin a class with, class, please get out your books and turn to page 245. What did we immediately do? Well, if you were 6th grade Vince, you checked out because those words signaled waste of time. What's even worse, in that same few seconds, our highly evolved brains are also deciphering if the environment is friendly or not. Again, is it in my best interest to play or to overthrow the meeting? Now, back as a 6th grader, in that moment, I began to plot to overthrow my class and to advance my ambitious agenda. Just imagine what a county commissioner might be thinking in these seconds. Now, you didn't know all that was happening, but it is. So what could you do slightly different to have a big impact, and no one would even recognize that you were doing it? I believe there's only one way to start a meeting, and it's the same way if you walked into a social setting and wanted someone to and wanted to engage people. If you walked up to a person or a group in a social setting with something important to say and wanted them to immediately be receptive to you, you, of course, would say, hello, it's 5 p.m., December 2nd. I have 47 issues I'd like to speak with you. Of course you wouldn't. Instead, you might say, I think we have something in common. Just go along with me on this one. When someone walks up to you and says, I think we have something in common, your brain does something very different. It doesn't turn off. We can't. We're programmed not to. We engage. We want to know more. They've signaled to us that they're one of us, and guess what? They're not a threat. And all we've said was, I think we have something in common. So what would that look like in a county commission meeting? I think we have something in common. How might that actually sound? Well, there's 1,000 ways to say it, and there's 1,000 ways to convey that during a meeting, but allow me to demonstrate once again. Good afternoon, everyone. As I call this meeting to order, let me thank all of you commissioners for your hard work that we did together today at the budget workshop. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a lot of issues before us on tonight's agenda, and I know we all feel strongly about them. But I know our staff and this commission's up to the task. But if you're like me, you may need another cup of coffee. Mr. Administrator, will you please introduce item 1? Well, did you see what happened there? It was very subtle. No one even noticed that you were setting the temperature in the room or setting the thermostat. But we connected with them on a similar experience, right, over the budget workshop. We gave them permission and made it safe for people to have strong feelings just by, well, saying it. You know what's on the agenda. It's predictable. And we told them that they'd be heard. Hey, even if we need to have another cup of coffee, we'll make sure that we have enough time. That's subtly what setting that thermostat looks like. And I can promise you that this slight change in behavior in the chairman in setting that thermostat can dramatically influence the mood in the room and the effectiveness of the meeting. Now let that sink in and we'll come back to that. But let's talk about who else is in the room, and that's the public. It's very important that the chairman set the mood for them as well. So if you haven't walked into a county commission meeting yet where you can cut the tension with a knife, well, you surely will. But again, like the previous example, rather than predicting or even acknowledging this in that moment and trying to set the mood, many chairmen will simply bang a gavel, announce to the room that he or she will be calling to the meeting calling us to order at precisely the appointed hour, that we have 347 speakers on the agenda, that we plan to strictly enforce time limits, and then we launch right into the agenda, right? Well, you've set the mood, but probably not in a good way. Remember that split second when people decide how they're going to behave? Well, you better believe that applies to the public as well. So missing that moment scenario, again, we're emphasizing efficiency over empathy. It says, yes, we know you have a problem, or else you wouldn't be here, and here's how we plan to manage you tonight. So how do you think people, already upset people perhaps, react to being managed? Well, we'll get into that a little later when it goes wrong, but remember, the most important thing to do here is avoid things going wrong with a slight change in behavior. Because if you miss the moment to at least try to set the mood, the tension in that room will predictably grow. And at some point in the room, you can set it by your watch, tick, 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 boom, right? It's predictable. So how can the chairman set the mood for the public a little different? Well, again, maybe something like this. On behalf of the board, I want to thank all of you for taking your time to be here tonight. This is clearly an important issue for a lot of people. We have a big crowd here, and to be fair to everyone, we have some time limits, but we will respect everyone who wishes to speak. And I know this sounds familiar to you too, but it's important to emphasize. You see what we did there? I emphasized perhaps the two most important things: fairness and respect. Everyone wants it, and they wouldn't be there if they felt like they had it. And notice, here's a little trick in the subtlety. I didn't say, I'm going to ask you to be respectful. No, I've seen this happen, and it just upsets people more. Instead, I said, we are going to be fair and respectful. And that has a much bigger influence on behavior. It's hard to be obnoxious to someone who is being fair and respectful to you. Not impossible, but hard. It's easy when someone tells you, be respectful. It's kind of like telling someone to calm down, right? What happens when you tell someone to calm down? So quick summary here, commissioners, on setting the mood. So we started off with the easiest and most important thing. Again, set the mood. It's not a feel-good thing. Remember, that key behavior of the effective chairman that we'll keep coming back to. It's about predicting problems and using slight changes of behavior which have a big impact on the meeting. And remember, as chair, you set this thermostat on the issues in the room. You're just like my wife. You're the only one who can touch the thermostat in that room. And given the issues on the agenda, No one wants this mood to be set on its own. So now that you've set the mood, commissioners, the effective chairman has to run the meeting, right? Okay. Now, I know it says a lot about me and how sad my life might be after working in county government for over 25 years, but a well-run commission meeting to me is simply a thing of beauty. Now, I thought about one of those meetings when I was putting together this section. And so let me tell you a quick story about that. So several years ago, I was asked by a county to come speak to their commission on a controversial issue. Always nice to have somebody from just outside the family to come talk about a controversial issue. And they needed a subject matter expert. And since I was from over 50 miles away and owned a tie and charged nothing for my services, I was immediately qualified. I noticed the chairman, however, in this county ran a great meeting, and I told her so, to which she responded, yep, we have rules. We all know the rules, and I enforce the rules. Well, she, by the way, was a retired police officer, and I could tell that she meant what she said. And I could tell her fellow commissioners appreciated her. Now, she set the mood actually rather nicely for the meeting, but there was no doubt it was going to be a well-run meeting. Now, there's a backstory here, as you know, I should have predicted. She went on to explain to me, she said, Vince, our meetings of the county commission here used to be an embarrassing free-for-all. And I'll always remember how she described it. She said, now, you got to imagine this is a coastal county, mind you. And she said, our meetings used to look like a bunch of seagulls at the beach. Commissioners flew in for the board meeting, enjoyed the food and beverage, crapped all over the place, and flew away after the meeting. Well, you could see how that image might stick with you. So number 2, run the meeting like a cop. Not this cop, but this cop. Now, I'm not going to talk about parliamentary procedure here. Chastity Osteen is going to do that when she follows me. I'm not going to address at this moment dealing with disruptors. You might expect that. Nope, that's in the next section. What we're going to look at now is how the effective chairman runs a meeting using 3 roles of a police officer, just because it's an easy way and a very relevant way to think about it. And those are as a law enforcer, as a traffic cop, and as protector of people's rights. So we're going to hit each one of those real quick. So let's first think about the law enforcer and the effective chairman's role as a law enforcer. Well, maybe more like a rule enforcer, but that doesn't sound quite as tough. So like the commissioner explained to me in the colorful seagull example, you can't run a commission meeting if you have constant disruptions, if you have commissioners getting on soapboxes and people disregarding the agenda, et cetera. Of course we can. The first question people want to ask, of course, is what do I do when this happens? Again, it's too late when that happens. The more important question is, why does this happen? The more important question is, why does this happen? So there are 2 basic reasons that people do this. And that is that they feel like the meeting is not theirs. Again, people are much less likely to interrupt their own meetings, right? And they feel like the rules are not fairly administered or that the chairman is playing favorites. Again, it's more difficult for people to act out when they feel like they're being treated fairly. So chairman in this role must uphold a fair set of rules and administer those rules equitably and consistently among commissioners, yes. And the rules must reinforce that these are the commission's rules for the meeting and for the commission's meeting. They're not the chairman's rules. That's the kiss of death. They're the commissioner's rules. So if your job as the chair is to uphold and fairly administer the rules, let's talk about how to most effectively do that. Again, even in this law enforcer role, the effective chairman is proactive in predicting and avoiding bad things happening before they ever get into the commission chambers. And one of those most important things I want to stress here is what we call norming, okay? Norming, this is when the board simply agrees on how they will interact with one another as a group and conduct your meeting. I've talked to many commissioners over the years that have, had some what they considered to be less than ideal conditions in their commission meetings. And it's amazing when I asked them have they ever talked about how they would interact as a group. Sometimes the answer is no. And so commissions don't spend probably enough time on this. It's a good annual practice, maybe at a board retreat. But the point here is, like setting the mood at a commission meeting, if you miss the opportunity to intentionally establish norms for your meetings, those norms will occur unintentionally. And again, they may not be the norms everyone wants. Rather, this intentional process creates buy-in, and it reinforces your role as the chairman, making it easier to perform your role. So it's very important. The next most important thing I want to talk about here are meeting rules, and having meeting rules as a written policy. It sounds like a small thing, but you should have your meeting rules as a written policy. Kind of a best practice. They should cover all the basics: attendance, quorum, voting, agenda rules. And by elevating it to a county policy, you are elevating the importance of it, and you're demonstrating the consistency of those rules and the importance of the consistency of those rules. And again, amendments must be approved by a majority vote of the board, since it's a board policy. So again, that reinforces that these are everyone's rules. And once you have your rules, commissioner buy-in, they're all clearly written and you have them as a policy. Now it's time to enforce the rules, right? Well, wrong. The first thing you need to do as the chair is to model these rules. So the chair should personify the conduct you want to see from your board, right? That's pretty basic. But the most important thing you can do is to model those. It gives you credibility to enforce those rules, and I can't say enough about the importance of this one. As for agenda rules themselves, not having them is a big source of problems. So here are just a couple of examples of actual written rules that you should have regarding your agenda. And your rules should clearly say when the agenda is to be distributed. Again, sounds basic. I'm sure you have them, but in some cases, people don't. And why is that so important? Because doing so, distributing the agenda and doing it consistently and doing it early, again, avoids predictable problems. It provides adequate times for briefings. It provides sort of a cooling off period, if you will. Number two, the rules should clearly state how agenda items get on the agenda. I can't stress this one enough, commissioners. And that rule should be that placing an agenda item on the agenda requires a majority vote of the board. Again, this may be the practice that you have. It sounds simple, but it doesn't happen everywhere. And if you let it slip or let it slide, that you can run into real problems. One of the most common reasons for commissioners getting upset at a meeting, which is never good and can lead to problems, is when they wanted an agenda item on the agenda that didn't happen. Oftentimes it was because a motion never happened to that effect, but there was a discussion, there was an intimation. We all kind of thought we were saying the right thing. We thought we were given direction. I, as one commissioner, thought I gave direction and another commissioner didn't. These are the things that we have these rules for, and it's why they're so important. Which leads me to number three, which is to make formal motions mandatory. Sounds basic, but some commissioners slip into conversations like this. And by making motions mandatory, it eliminates confusion and ensures that any direction represents the consensus of the board, right? So again, the commission's rules are for the commission's meeting, and they're there to help keep bad things from happening and to facilitate a very good and effective meeting. And an effective chairman models these rules and implements them fairly and consistency, and we can come back and discuss that. But let's move on to the chairman's role as a traffic cop. So the role of traffic cop is another essential role of the effective chairman. Like it says here, in this role, the chairman is trying to help commissioners get from where they are to where they want to be without crashing into one another. It's pretty basic during the course of a meeting. It's a very important role. So how do you do that? Let's take a look.
There we go.
Well, look at that. I think that was Commissioner McKinley out there. That's the way I've seen her run a meeting. I'm just kidding. Of course, it might not look like that guy, but I'll tell you, commissioners, your role as chairman in keeping the meeting moving and on task is critical. So you should think of yourself as a traffic cop. You're giving signals and motions are moving through you. I don't want to mix metaphors here, commissioners, but this is where the effective chair does the play-by-play announcing of a sportscaster. It's the constant reminder of what's happening in the meeting and to members. That there is or is not a motion on the floor, to interpret, to clarify, to occasionally restate the motion. Again, it's not pulling back from the meeting, it's leaning in. For example, commissioners, we have a motion on the floor in a second to approve option 1 and to table option 2 until the January 26th meeting. Again, this is not extra, as my kids would say. This is absolutely essential. It sounds redundant, but this play-by-play announcing serves two very important purposes. It keeps your fellow commissioners from getting frustrated or confused on the process or the specifics of a motion. Imagine that, confusion at a commission meeting, right? This tactic only provides clarity and avoids problems, but it not only provides clarity, rather, and avoids problems, but it also keeps the momentum of the meeting moving forward, because sometimes momentum can drift a meeting can drift backwards. And so another thing that the very effective chairman does in keeping the meeting going and keeping this momentum and this play-by-play, and this all comes together, is what we call the ABCs of a good meeting. And we'll talk in a moment about the chairman making sure that everyone has the opportunity to be heard, but it's also important, a very important skill of a chairman, to bring a conversation to a close. I'm not saying that anyone on your commission suffers from the pain of an undelivered speech. That would never happen, but it happens. And again, I've not seen that personally, but it's your job as chairman to keep the meeting moving. So a very important skill is what we call coaxing a motion. Now, the best chairman leans in at just the right time to inject that's a great idea, Commissioner, is that a motion? Now, there's usually a very receptive yes that will follow that, because think of this. Again, I know that much of this sounds very straightforward, but think of it this way. If a commissioner is running long, they're probably either trying to formulate a motion or they're trying to gain support for a motion. By doing this, a chairman can signal to the commissioner that they might have the votes and can potentially just lose them if they keep going, right? So here's a great example of coaxing a motion.
Next item, resolution determining trustee position vacant.
Guess I'll make that motion
Okay, motion made by trustee Ramirez-Lewinsky.
for discussion.
We're waiting for a second. Still waiting for a second.
You ought to know you're not going to get one.
It dies.
You already made your speech, and so we don't want to hear it again, to be real honest with you.
So it
You're
dies-
not going to get a second.
Dies for lack of a second. It dies for.
I understand, trustee Segwalt.
Well, how long are you gonna wait? I'm just asking a question. How long are you gonna wait?
Yeah, well, I'm still waiting for a second.
Okay, I fooled you. That was awkward. This is not how to coax a motion. In fact, I think that chairman needed a real cop at that meeting. And again, sometimes it's important to see how things are not done too, right? This brings me to my final critical cop role of the chairman, which is the protector of people's rights. So specifically, their right to be heard at a commission meeting. Those people, too, fall into two categories, right? Your commissioners and citizens. First, let's talk about commissioners. It's an important role of the chairman to listen for commissioners to get in, right? This prevents commissioners from feeling like they have to muscle their way in, which just creates problems. It also prevents other commissioners from dominating the conversation. Some techniques a chairman can use are simple phrases like, I think some others would like to get in, or this is such an important issue, I want to be sure everyone has the opportunity to weigh in before we vote. Wow, you see what just happened there? That was a prompt, a coax, and a close. That was the trifecta. But again, it's an important thing, and most counties have commissioner time on the agenda, and this is an important thing to make sure that you have, whether it's commission time or sharing of ideas, whatever you call it on your agenda. Again, it's important that it's there. In doing so, it prevents the need for commissioners to feel like they have to muscle their way in, maybe introduce issues that aren't germane relative to other agenda items, or to create time for themselves at meetings, which again can only lead to problems. So it's a good little pressure relief valve to have, and I know many of you have that. But similarly, the chairman in this role needs to protect citizens' rights to be heard at a commission meeting. Only now that's the law. In 2013, the Florida legislature adopted a statute requiring the public to be, quote, given a reasonable opportunity to be heard on the proposition before the board. Now, that state statute provides you discretion, but the way you handle this should be consistent and explicitly written in your meeting policies. For example, you have discretion on the amount of time an individual has to speak. You have discretion relative to the procedures for having representatives speak on behalf of groups or not. You have discretion on providing for a specific time on your meeting agenda or times on your meeting agendas. My favorite rule, which is said to have existed somewhere in Florida, was that a person could speak at a meeting as long as they could keep their hand in a bucket of ice water. Now, I'm not sure you want to do that, but you get the point. In summary, again, commissioners, running the commission meeting using the various roles of a good cop is an easy way to think about some of the most important behaviors of the effective chairman. Now, if you actively do these things as a law enforcer, consistently and fairly reinforcing the rules, as a traffic cop, keeping the meeting moving and keeping commissioners from bumping into one another, as a protector of people's rights, ensuring that commissioners and citizens are heard, if you do all these things, most people, even if they disagree, will still feel like they got a good shake. I said most people, which is a great segue into our next section. So, commissioners, picture yourself back at your commission chambers, chairing a meeting. You've set the mood. You've welcomed people to the meeting. You've thanked your fellow commissioners for the great work they've done. Everyone's in good spirits. You're running the meeting well. Everyone is getting their chance to speak. People aren't bumping into one another. You're coaxing motions. The board's making decisions. You're moving on the agenda along smoothly. You know, Chairman, you've got this thing down pat. And about now, you're probably feeling pretty good about yourself. And this happens. That's right. Even if you've done everything right, good meetings can still go bad. All it takes is one person, or like this video, the entire room of citizens who want to be disruptive and hijack your meeting. As a side note, the video you just saw took place not long ago in Michigan. I didn't want to use any Florida examples, so you don't have to look very far for current examples. They happen everywhere. So I've shown you one extreme example, but now, what else does it look like when things go bad? Things that you'll be much more familiar with. So stop me if you've seen any of these. Personal attacks against commissioners, staff, or other citizens, baiting commissioners during public comment, speaking for longer than time limits, waving inappropriate signs or obscene signs during a meeting. And those are just your former commissioners, or those are just your fellow commissioners. Now let's talk about disruptive citizens. Just a joke there. Of course, we're talking about a very few citizens, thankfully. However, they can have a major impact on your meetings, right? On the screen, I wanted to share with you just a few of my favorite signs and disruptions. I want to just point out the photo at the end here where citizens are literally standing on the dais unfurling their banner. Anyway, I'm sure you've all had your own experiences. Signs calling on you to be fired, signs calling you names, signs telling you how to vote, One of my most recent favorites, not on the screen, was a citizen who came to a commission meeting not long ago and threw dollar bills at commissioners, implying bribes and corruption. These things can be very creative. But just like the other topics we've discussed today, the skillful chairman knows how to recognize these situations and diffuse them in many cases before they happen. For example, in Leon County, we have a rule, no signs. There's a good one. So before we talk about diffusing, let's ask the more important question of why people want to be disruptive. So people usually have a few common reasons they want to be disruptive. Again, when you talk about the predictability of these things, they feel the agenda isn't theirs. We talked about that, and that maybe the rules haven't been applied fairly. We mentioned that. But there are other reasons, too. Maybe a deep-seated political or personal disagreement with one or more commissioners. Maybe the government has done them wrong in some way. That's their belief. It may not even necessarily be the county government, but they know how to get to the commission chambers. The government is hiding something. Again, not even necessarily your government, but it could be. A general distrust for local government. You're being corrupt, not transparent. You're not citizen-friendly enough. You're wasting taxpayer dollars. You're too cozy with special interest, and the list goes on and on. And again, just to demonstrate how predictable some of this is, there are common types of disruptors. Let me know if you've heard any of these or if any of these sound familiar to you. The criticizer. The board just can't get anything right. The know-it-all. Your staff is misleading you. You should have listened to me. The amateur staffer or attorney. I've conducted my own research. Your staff is wrong, and they're committing malpractice. The camera panderer. I'm bringing this issue up for the folks watching you at home tonight. The meeting wrecker. I don't care what you say, Chairman. I'm taking all the time I need on this issue. The character assassin. The chairman is a thief, the administrator is a liar, and the attorney is a hired gun. So how do you deal with this? First, as I mentioned earlier, it's important to understand that citizens have a right to be heard. Let me play a brief clip from you that summarizes this.
We have a constitutional right to educate, annoy, and even disrespect you. And we won't be stifled. It's a right, not a privilege. Vote no.
Well, her point's not subtle, but it's a good one. And it's perhaps an important reminder to us. So how do you deal with this, though, especially when it gets personal and it doesn't feel particularly constructive? Well, keeping it in perspective is important. And there's a long historical perspective to consider. The quote on the screen, yes, is from Plato 2,400 years ago, commissioners. And it says, just as the gadfly constantly agitates a horse, preventing it from becoming sluggish, so too Socrates prevents the city from becoming sluggish, careless, or intolerant. You could probably tell at this point in the presentation that I taught in the MPA school at FSU for 15 years. But it's important to have a historical context for this. Folks, this stuff's not new. It goes all the way back to Plato around 400 BC when he described Socrates as a gadfly in ancient Greece, and the term stuck. He went on to make the case that society needs gadflies. I don't know about that, but who am I to argue with Plato, right? So that's why I say first, take a learner's stance when dealing with disruptive citizens. It's not easy to do, but try to filter out the personal attack and learn what the source of their grievance might be. If you have to be subject to it, you might as well learn from it. So less philosophically and more practically, also pay attention to yours and your fellow commissioners' body language. Citizens can easily see if you're being receptive to them, if you're leaned in, if your arms are relaxed, or if you've checked out. You're looking at your cell phone, your eyes are rolling, your arms are crossed. Citizens sensing that the board is paying attention and is genuinely engaged in the moment, that continues to set a mood of mutual respect. Remember, chairman modeling. The chairman should be the foremost in this modeling, and the chairman should continue to model positive body language. It's not just being respectful, but what you're actually doing is you're disarming a tense situation, and you're trying again, now that you've done everything to avoid this type of thing happening, now you have to manage it in the moment, right? So here's a little trick. Always use proper titles. Mr., Mrs., Doctor, Reverend. It's subtle, but it works. It sounds small, but it goes a long way to putting people at ease and, again, reinforcing respect. Ask citizens to come to the podium, not to scream from their seats, to be recognized. I've seen that change behavior dramatically. When someone comes to the podium and now you give them the opportunity to speak, it changes things. Preferably with a system of speaker cards. I'm sure you have that in place. But it's funny that these little things actually do change this type of behavior. And don't try to suppress their speech. It only makes a bad situation worse. So now that you've set the stage, you've got great body language, and you've asked people to come to the podium to speak, then what happens? They yell, they rant, they rave, they basically show you no respect or your fellow commissioners any respect at all. And what is the biggest single mistake the chairman or the commissioners can make? Well, it's to take the bait. Don't take the bait, commissioners. I know it's easy to say and harder to do. Don't engage. That's what they want you to do. They're trying to goad you into responding. Now you've made it a conversation or a dialogue, and the cycle continues. Also, by taking the bait, you put yourself on the spot. Maybe you don't have all the information in the moment to be able to respond, and you might respond with inaccurate information. They would love that to happen. Remember, you're the deciders. Be respectful. Thank them. Agenda an issue when you can consider the issue more broadly and not just in the interest of the loudest person in the room. Some of the worst decisions ever made have been made to appease that person in the moment. So, though it's hard to believe, sometimes it's not a citizen but a fellow commissioner that's being disruptive. Again, I know you've never seen this back home. But lucky for us, they tend to be few. Most commissioners want to be productive and to be collegial. But these few tend to be habitual offenders, and we thought it was important to probably include this. All the same rules apply to them as to citizens. So how do you deal with this? First, the effective chairman, you maintain order. The most effective way by far to combat a disruptive commissioners is with a well-run meeting. This is not where these people thrive. These types of people thrive in chaos, so they try to create it. It makes sense. A well-run meeting is kryptonite to the disruptive commissioner. Treat them with respect. Give them their time according to your rules. Let them talk. Let them get it out of their system. They tend not to have a great long-term plan. They flame out unless you give them fuel. If you have to take a break, take a break. Adjourn the meeting. And commissioners, this is my all-time favorite. If you have a chronic disruptive commissioner, make them chair. I've seen it work. Finally, commissioners, let's talk for just a minute about a new experience that many of you got in 2020, and that's virtual commission meetings. I wanted to include this slide for obvious reasons, notwithstanding that we all have had to return to in-person meetings. That could change at any time, hopefully not. And some of you may still be in a hybrid meeting format with commissioners or citizens joining virtually. It may seem like virtual meetings are completely different, but the good news is all the same guidelines we've already talked about apply. So here are a few tips on how to run a virtual meeting effectively. We talked earlier about the importance of having agenda rules in place for how a meeting should be run and enforcing those rules fairly and consistently. In a virtual meeting, it's the same thing. It's even more important to have a structure in place for how and when people speak. And this is true of both citizens and your fellow commissioners. Just because everyone has their own camera and microphone doesn't make it a free-for-all. So what does that look like? For your other commissioners, you might ask them to use the raise the hand button on Zoom to be recognized, or you could recognize them whenever you see them physically raise their hand. However you do it, it's important to apply the same rules fairly and consistently. Another point we talked about earlier is that it's especially important here addressing potential problems again before they happen. There are a few things your IT staff can do with the meeting technology that can go a long way here. For citizens, especially in virtual meetings, you should take it as easy as possible. You should make it as easy as possible for them to access your meetings. Give the public an opportunity to submit comments in the meeting, either by attending in person or through video or by calling in or submitting written comments online. This shows that you're giving citizens every opportunity to be heard, and it helps diffuse, again, some of the reasons that we talked about earlier, why people feel like they may need to be disruptive. You might even find your meetings getting a little shorter. We've seen lots of citizens who send written comments in instead of using their 3 minutes to speak in person. Also, have citizens sign up in advance if they want to join the meeting by video or by phone. This way, your IT staff can send a unique invitation to everyone who joins, which helps keep the meeting from being Zoom bombed, a new creation, which we've had the opportunity to experience here in Leon County. And in the next presentation, I would urge you to ask Chastity Osteen about her experience being Zoom bombed. You're welcome, Chastity. A few minutes before the meeting goes live, citizens can log into the meeting, test their video, audio. Again, this can avoid problems. And this can also help you minimize the moments of awkward silence and bad connection issues and that stuff. Finally, again, if we end up back in a virtual environment more predominantly, and again, we all hope we don't, but use the screen Brady Bunch style. This allows you to read nonverbal cues from commissioners, like when someone wants to get in. It'll also help give you the opportunity to pause if someone's having an issue with their videos or their microphone. You get the idea. We all probably have a little too much experience with this. So final thoughts, commissioners, and then I'll open it up for discussion. While there is behavioral science involved here, there's no perfect science here, but there are a few tricks of the trade that can go a long way. Again, there are things you can do to address the predictable, most of which require small changes in behavior that you will avoid the avoidable if you use them. No one will even notice you're doing it. Again, they'll just say, wow, that chairman runs a great meeting. Also, remember that you're not just chairman at your commission meetings, but you're also a chairman at appearances and other events, and you may have other roles that are more specific in your county, but be accessible to staff. Spread the love to your fellow commissioners. The goodwill you show during your chairmanship will translate into your meetings, I promise you. And finally, as you could tell from this presentation, it's not only important to keep your humanity and your humility, but your sense of humor may be what serves you best. With that, commissioners, I want to thank you very much for your time and your participation. We crammed a lot into the training today, and let me just take a moment here and ask if you have any questions that you'd like me to address with you. And let me also put in a plug again for Chastity Osteen, who's up next, who'll talk about parliamentary procedure, the real important stuff, and I know you're going to learn a lot from her. And with that, commissioners, I'd be happy to answer any questions anyone might have.
Vince, I know you can't see us, but unless there's a real pressing question at the moment, we got about 30 minutes left. Does anybody have a question? Otherwise, we'll have Vince introduce Chastity to talk about some parliamentary procedure. If we got time at the end, then maybe we can have some additional questions. Any immediate questions? All right, Vince, no one's hand was raised, which means you did an awesome job as you normally do.
I'll take it.
All right, so Vince, I'll allow you to introduce your attorney. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Well, I don't have a formal introduction for her, but I can tell you, Chastity Osteen, she's about as sharp as they get. Eric, you mentioned this earlier, that while Chastity has vast experience as a lawyer and has served as general counsel for several of our state agencies here in Leon County and is board certified in local government law, she'd been away from the local government game for a little while. And we were able to bring her back. And one of the very first things that she had to do, and I won't steal any of her thunder, was she got thrown right into the issues where our board wanted to re-examine some of our parliamentary procedures. And she came right up to speed on those issues. And I have to say, has us more focused in that regard and really better than we've ever been. And with that, I'd like to introduce you to Chastity Osteen.
Thank you, Vince. That was very nice. Can everybody hear me okay? Somebody could nod if you can hear me. Thumbs up. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with everybody. Sorry, some technical difficulties. Let's see. Okay, can everybody see the starting screen, parliamentary procedure, pointers and pitfalls? All right, so I'm gonna go pretty fast through these slides, but just to start it out and to dovetail off of what Vince was just talking about, these are tools in the toolbox to help you through the meetings, which can start to go pretty fast as you are working your way through a meeting. And meetings can become very confusing and chaotic when you don't adhere to your rules. But properly used, these rules can really help facilitate the smooth and efficient conduct of the business of the board. And it all distills down to a couple of different things. One of which is, the intent is, because these meetings can be inherently emotional and conflict ridden, as Vince mentioned, it just comes down to fairness and respect. Courtesy to all, you're taking up things in an orderly manner, one item at a time. It is a majority rule, but there's also the need to respect the rights of the minority, even when there's disagreement, to show partiality to none, and to protect the absentee, okay? And that's pretty much what this slide talks about. So boards typically have their own policies and rules of procedure that govern their meetings. And they don't necessarily strictly adhere to parliamentary procedure or formalities. But it's just important to know what rules, what policy governs the conduct of your commissions, your body's meetings. And they have a lot of moving parts. And so just knowing that parliamentary procedure as you're dealing with the substantive issues in these meetings will help assist in multitasking during those meetings and keeping your mind focused on the substance of what's being debated and ultimately voted on by your members. And there is a strategy with knowing how to maneuver through a meeting. And it's a good tool in your toolbox to running an effective meeting, because it can help you when you want to further a motion that's on the floor, and it can help you when you are opposed to it and you want to, for lack of a better phrase, hijack that motion and instead put forth your position on what you think your body should be voting on. Now, the most commonly used rules are Robert's Rules of Order. Those are the ones that Leon County uses, but it's not the only one. And there are some jurisdictions in Florida that use other rules of parliamentary procedure. So again, just knowing the rules that your body adheres to is kind of a fundamental thing that you need to get up to speed on pretty quickly. So just some of the basics about parliamentary procedure. Your presiding officer, Mr. Chairman or Madam Chairman. That's the really technically traditional way to address your presiding officer. It can be as formal, as informal as your body wants. And then the presiding officer typically addresses him or herself in the third person as the chair. Okay. Now, to continue with the metaphor that Vince used before about football, your chair, your Madam Chairman, or your Mr. Chairman is your quarterback of your team, right, of your group. So they call the meeting to order at the appointed time, making sure there's quorum present, otherwise you can't vote on anything. They announce the proper sequence of business according to the agenda, and then they are responsible, and this is part of this multitasking function of the chairperson, recognizing the members who are entitled to speak on the floor at any given time. And so they state and put to vote all the questions which are moved and seconded, and which arise in the course of the meeting and they announce the result of the vote. And this is really particularly important for a couple of reasons. There can be a lot of debate. As Vince mentioned, people may think that what they said were adopted as part of the motion, or maybe an amended motion that's on the floor. But if it isn't part of the spoken motion, it gives that member an opportunity to speak up and say, wait, I thought that this was part of what we were voting on. Or there could be uncertainty. If there's a lot of debate, if a lot of different motions are made in the course of debate, it can be hard to keep track, and not only for the commissioners, but also for members of the public who are there and whoever takes your minutes. So just making sure that everything is stated clearly before a motion and a second is put to a vote. And so people know, did it pass? How many votes did it take? That's all very important to maintain the clarity of what is happening in your particular meeting. Enforcing the rules of order, debate, and decorum. Vince went over that in some detail and why that's really important, so I won't belabor that. But it's also to expedite the business of the board while ensuring that, again, everybody has a right to speak and be heard on the items up for debate. Now, the chair does decide the questions of order traditionally. They respond to any inquiries relating to points of order, which is about, we'll talk about in more detail later, or points of information at any point during the meeting. They frequently refer inquiries about the parliamentary procedure to the designated parliamentarian. In Leon County, the parliamentarian is the county attorney, so that's me for Leon County. Your county may have somebody else. And they also, very importantly, declare the meeting adjourned at once all the business is finished up and conducted. So what does the parliamentarian do? Again, the county attorney is usually designated as your parliamentarian. We first rely on whatever your policies and rules of procedure are as the guidance, and as a secondary source, as Leon County's policy says, we consult, in the absence of something directly on point in the board's policy, our secondary source, which is Robert's Rules of Order. Now, we can call attention during the meeting to errors in the proceedings, which can affect the substantive rights of any member or otherwise do harm. But if it's something that's a technical error or that isn't really affecting the substantive rights of any member or the public, then we're really not going to interrupt and disrupt the meeting and the flow of the meeting unless it's pretty serious. So this is something that I think is really interesting. There's even there are formalities with gavels. I mean, probably your commission has it, some don't, ours does, but they all have, depending on the number of taps, they all serve a different purpose. One tap is basically letting you know to be seated, announce results of a vote, or to adjourn the meeting. 2 taps calls the meeting to order, and then multiple firm taps is to regain or maintain order. And then the lighter taps can be for breaches, minor breaches of order. And that can be helpful in times when maybe things get a little emotional, whether amongst your members or the public, to just kind of make everybody pause so that everyone can take a deep breath and regain decorum. So there are different types of motions. The main motion, which is the one that's most common, this brings the business before the board for consideration and action. Now, it is debatable, which means all the commissioners get an opportunity to speak. It can be amended. So if you make a motion to have jeans be worn every Friday by all county employees, I can make a motion to amend your main motion to also allow all county employees to wear tennis shoes on Fridays as well. So after a member makes a motion, the chair has to ask for a second. And if that second, and this goes back to Vince's presentation, if there is no second, that main motion fails immediately. So there's no debate on it. There's no further discussion about that. The conduct of the meeting moves forward. Now, if there is a second, then that means there's a question on the floor, and that particular motion is up for debate amongst the members. Now, once debate ends, or if there was no debate, then the chairperson, again, being your quarterback, is supposed to ask or move the question and say it's ready for a vote. But when doing so, again, to maintain clarity, ensure everybody knows, both the members and the public and your person taking minutes, the chair should restate that motion, put the question to a vote, and then announce the results so that everybody knows whether that motion passed or failed. Okay. So a secondary motion. That can be made and considered while the main motion is pending. These are subsidiary motions, privilege motions, and incidental motions. So they're different subcategories. Now these subsidiary motions, they apply to any main motion, and they can amend or dispose of that main motion. So if somebody doesn't like the motion on the floor that's already been seconded and that is currently in debate, you can make a motion to postpone indefinitely. And basically what that does, if you get a majority vote on that, is it kills that original main motion without there ever being a vote on the main motion. You can make a motion to postpone indefinitely or postpone to a certain time. And if during the course of debate, there's a consensus, a majority decision of the board that, or maybe you just believe that it needs more, you need more time. Like maybe you want to research some more, you want to take a look at it, you want staff to dig deeper into an issue, you can make a motion to either postpone definitely or postpone to a certain time and give your body that additional time to consider the issue before a vote is taken. Now, if you have a really long agenda and you're concerned about there being enough time before maybe, let's say, your meeting starts at 3 like ours does, public hearings start at 6, you have 47 items on your agenda before public hearings start, you can make a motion to limit or the opposite, extend debate, which places just the time limit or extends the time limit for debate. You can do that for all items on your agenda, or you can just do it for individual agenda items. So it can be used differently. You can make a motion to commit or refer an issue that's currently under debate to a committee, again, for further analysis and information to bring back to the board. A motion to amend, which I mentioned before, it's very common. You can add, strike, or substitute words in the main motion. And a member can also ask permission to withdraw a motion. That happens sometimes too. After debate, sometimes the maker of the motion or the person who seconded the motion decides, I don't want to do this for whatever reason. They can withdraw their second or the main motion. And then lay on the table. This one, don't see really that often, but if someone makes a motion to lay on the table and it passes, it basically interrupts the pending business to permit immediate action on another measure. And it's basically just delays. It sets that main motion aside without setting a time to resume further consideration. So it can be taken up again when the majority decides to do so. And then there can be a motion on the previous question, which basically closes the debate on the pending motion and brings the matter to a vote. So anytime you use one of these motions, it's its own vote on this particular motion. So if there was a motion and a second, you're currently in debate, and I say, I make a motion for the previous question. There has to be a majority vote on your motion, which if it passes would end the debate and basically move the main motion to a vote. If that fails, debate continues. So there are also privilege motions. These address just strictly procedural matters. There's a hierarchy and a priority of motions. This takes precedent over any other pending motion. They do not have to relate to the business being discussed, and they have to be decided before the business of the meeting can continue, okay? So call for the orders of the day. Like our board policy sets out basically an order of business for items on our agenda. If somehow things get out of whack in your meeting and you're not following your agenda, someone can say, I make a motion to call for the orders of the day. And that means you have to go back and take up the business of the meeting as it's set forth in your agenda. Hopefully that doesn't happen very often. I have yet to see that happen. You can raise a question of privilege. And basically what that does is permit an emergency motion or question, which deals with the rights or privileges of the board as a whole or an individual member. So it has to get immediate consideration. And basically it's things like safety. If you see somebody being disruptive, or you see somebody who seems to be having like chest pains in the audience or something like that, or if it's super loud, you know, music is blaring in the background, the alarm goes off, something like that, temperature, this is a motion that you could say, you know, raise a question of privilege, and the body would have to deal with that right away. Recess and adjourn, those should be pretty much self-evident. And then you can fix the time to adjourn, or fix the time to which to adjourn, to use more technical language. So basically this dictates at the beginning of the meeting, or whatever time this motion is taken up, the date, time, and place for another meeting to take place if you need to continue your business. So incidental motions. These answers questions of procedure concerning another pending motion. And they do take precedent, again, in the hierarchy over any other pending motion, and they have to be considered before the business can continue. So incidental motions, point of order. So this is calls attention to a violation of the proper rules procedure, and they have to be promptly raised at the time of the alleged breach. And basically the chair at that point is called on to make a ruling and is obligated to enforce the proper rules of procedure at that point. And the chair rules on whether the point is well taken or is not well taken. Point of order is also known as a raise a question of order, okay? Now, in contrast to a point of order, which is about procedure, a point of information is used when you want or need additional information that relates to the matter being discussed. So it's not a question concerning rules of procedure. So it's point of orders for procedural matters. Point of information is for substantive issues currently before the board, okay? And it also is sometimes characterized as a request for information. And it's always addressed to the chair or through the chair to another member. And this prevents members of the commission from just ad hoc talking to each other without using the chair as the intermediary. Okay, so an appeal. This is done when a member thinks that the chairperson made an error, such as an error on a point of order. Now, traditionally, unless your rules dictate differently, a majority vote or tie vote by the members will sustain the decision of the chair. Okay, so unlike most votes which require at least a majority, even a tie vote will uphold the decision of the chair if there's an appeal. And then the motion and objection to the consideration of a question. This enables the body to avoid the main motion altogether, and it will basically just dismiss the main motion. Now, the body can also vote to suspend the rules. So if for some reason there's like a rule in your policy that says no member is allowed to speak more than 2 times on any matter before it with a time limit of 3 minutes each time, but it's a really weighty issue. There are a lot of consequences, and basically there's a consensus among at least a majority of the body that maybe you need more time. Then you would make a motion to suspend your rule related to the length of debate and amount of debate for board members on a particular item. So that's an example when you would use the motion to suspend the rules, okay? So when you wish to do something in a meeting that it can't not usually do without violating one of your rules, this is your motion to use. So precedence. Again, motions have a pecking order. A main motion has the lowest rank. So it kind of gets the ball rolling, but then all these other motions can occur in the course of, dealing with any particular item on your agenda. And when a motion is being considered, any motion that is higher in the precedence may be proposed, but you cannot make a motion of lower precedent. So we'll kind of look at a list of what that looks like. So privileged motions have the highest precedence, okay? And that is a list again of some of the very common privileged motions. Subsidiary motions are next, and then main motions have the lowest precedence. So you could make a motion to postpone to a certain time, and someone else could then make a motion to raise a question of privilege, but you couldn't, if there's a postpone to a certain time motion on the floor, then make a motion, well, let me back that. So you could raise, there could be a main motion on the floor, you could raise a question of privilege, someone at that time couldn't come back and make a motion to amend the main motion without the body disposing of the question of privilege first, because that one's currently on the floor and it has a higher precedence. So this is just kind of like a little cheat sheet. And of course, I'm not going to go through these, but these again are some common motions that are made during meetings, how you would go about saying it in this column here, whether you can interrupt the speaker currently with approval of the chair to have the floor for these motions, whether they require a second, whether they're debatable, and this is the default, and again, based on Robert's Rules of Order, your rules could be different, but the vote required for any of these motions to pass. And I also have an asterisk down here because I think it's helpful to know whether some of these are amendable or not. Some of them are, some of them aren't. So again, just going back to decorum, we typically impose rules on members of the public who come to be heard at these meetings, as Vince mentioned. It's usually a really bad idea to enforce the rules for the public and not enforce and adhere to the rules of your own body. That sets a bad tone. That can contribute to that perception that there is not orderly business being conducted, and just does not further, going back to the central theme, the feeling of fairness and respect, not just for each other, but also for your constituents who've taken the time to come to you with whatever issue they feel strongly about, want to speak on. So, these are, again, just things to refrain from doing, which can be hard in the moment when passions are high and people feel strongly about things. And just keep in mind that you're deemed to have yielded the floor when you finish speaking. You can only claim the floor again and speak again when you're recognized by the chair. So keep calm, maintain your decorum, and you're 85% of the way there. So these are just basic fundamentals. I'm wrapping up here. The board is required to give reasonable opportunity to be heard. And it was called the anti-shushing bill. Just an interesting, noteworthy item. It doesn't have to occur at the same meeting when the board takes the official action. Okay. Now there are some exceptions to this requirement to be heard. And again, you can adopt rules and procedures to maintain orderly conduct and proper decorum. So can the board consider or rescind a motion that was previously acted on? Yes, of course it can. A motion to reconsider has to be made at the same meeting on the same day or on the next succeeding day if you have meetings on consecutive days. A motion to reconsider is a motion that has to be made on a motion that was approved at a time prior to the preceding day. So that's a technical, we got caught up in that in Leon County this year about the distinction between those two motions. This just gives you a little information about the distinction between those two motions so that you have more information on that. Can the chair second a motion? Typically, yes, unless your rules say that the Chair cannot second a motion. That's typically permissible. Can a commissioner make a hostile amendment to a motion? Yes, provided it's germane to the original motion. And this gives you a little more information about, when that's permissible. What happens when we stray from the rules? It creates confusion, triggers criticism of the board, and it does sow discord. But it doesn't invalidate the board's action. And then there's actually some case law on that. So in avoiding the pitfalls, be prepared, know your rules, know your procedure, know what's substantively on your agenda, know what your position is on those matters, and then use your resources as well. If you know something's going to be contentious and you want to plan for contingencies, but you're not sure about the motions that need to be made for your plan A, plan B, and plan C, ask your parliamentarian to validate what that procedure would look like. And then finally, don't make it personal. I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has, although I see that we're a minute over time.
Chastity, this is Eric. Thank you. I knew only about 20% of what you went through and my head is spinning. I think the cheat sheet that you showed up there is something that a lot of our commissioners would like to have. And so thank you again. And commissioners, as I mentioned, conferences is a bit of a hybrid model that are not all going to be done remotely. Our presenters today could not be here, but we worked with them for several weeks to make this happen. And I think they did a fantastic job. So I want to thank Chastity and Vince for your time today and all the stuff that you do for the Association of Counties. And if you can't hear that, that's applause from the audience. Commissioners, again, I want to mention at 10 o'clock, we have the new commissioners orientation. I encourage you to come to that, especially the new commissioners, obviously. We're going to talk about some of the training programs. Our executive director, Ginger Delegal, will talk about the association in general. We'll also have Dr. Rod Clauser from the University of Florida come in and talk to you for about 20, 30 minutes about some county government issues you may not have thought of while you were campaigning. And then we'll have Mr. Greg Stewart with the law firm of Neighbors, Giblin and Nickerson talk about sunshine law requirements, open meetings, public meetings, and some ethics requirements. And so with that, I want to thank you for coming in this morning so early and refresh your coffees, and we'll see you back at 10 o'clock. Thank you.